Well, this is a practical concept we need in elucidating people's relation. I noticed with my patients, particularly with people that are in public life, that they have a certain way of presenting themselves. For instance, take the doctor. He has a certain way, for instance, he has good bedside manners, and he behaves as one expects a doctor behaves. He may even identify himself with it, and believe that he is what he appears to be. He must appear in a certain form, unless people don't believe that he's a doctor. And so when he's a professor, he's also supposed to behave in a certain way so that it is plausible that he is a professor. So the persona is partially the result of the demand society has, and on the other side it is a compromise with what one likes to be or as one likes to appear. So take, for instance, a person. He also has his particular manner and as corresponding to the general expectation. And he behaves also in another way, combined with his persona that is forced upon him by society in such a way that also is fiction of himself. His idea about himself is more or less portrayed or represented. So the persona is a certain complicated system of behavior, which is partially dictated by society, and partially dictated by the expectations or the wishes one nurtures oneself. Now, this is not the real personality, in spite of the fact that people will assure that it is all quite real and quite honest, yet it is not. Now, such a performance, or say, the performance of the persona is quite all right, as long as you know that you are not identical with the way in which you appear. But if you are unconscious of this fact, then you get into sometimes very disagreeable conflicts. Namely, people can't help noticing that at home, for instance, you are quite different from what you appear to be in public. And people who don't know it stumble over it in the end. They deny that they are like that, but they are like that, they are it. And then you don't know now which is the real man. Is he the man as he is at home, or in intimate relations, or is he the man that appears in public? It is a question of Jekyll and Hyde. Occasionally, there is such a difference that you would always be able to speak of a double personality. And the more that is pronounced, the more people are neurotic. They get neurotic because they have two different ways. They contradict themselves all the time, and in as much as they are unconscious of themselves, they don't know it. They think they are all one. Everybody sees that they are two, and some know him only for one side, some others know him only for the other side, and then there are situations that clash because the way you are creates certain situations with people in your relations. And these two situations don't chime in, they are just dishonest, and the more that is the case, the more people are neurotic. Actually, would you say that the individual may even have more than two personas? We can't afford it very well to play more than two roles, but there are cases, for instance, where people have up to 5 different personalities in cases of a dissociation of personality, where, for instance, the one person, say, call it person A, doesn't know of the existence of the person B, but B knows of A, or there may be a third personality C that doesn't know of the two others. There are such cases in literature, but they are rare. Very rare. The ordinary case is just an ordinary dissociation of a personality. One calls that a systematic dissociation, in contradistinction to the chaotic or unsystematic dissociation you find in schizophrenia. What is the difference between the term ego, as you see it, and the term persona? Well, you see, the ego is supposed to be the representative of the real person. For instance, in the case where B knows of A, but it doesn't know of B in that case, one would say the ego is more on the side of C, because the ego has a more complete knowledge, and A is a split of personality. Now, you also use the term self. Would this have a different meaning than, say, ego or persona? Quite true, yes. You see, when I say self, then you must not think of I myself, because that is only your empirical self, and that is covered by the term ego. But when it is matter of the self, then it is matter of a personality that is more complete than the ego, because the ego consists of what you are conscious of, what you know to be yourself. For instance, in our example, B that knows A and A doesn't know B, B is relatively in the position of the self. Namely, the self is on the one side, the ego on the other side, the unconscious personality which is in the possession of everybody. Very often it's just the other way around, that the unconscious is in possession of consciousness. Well, that is a different case. Now, you see, while I am talking, I'm conscious of what I say, I'm conscious of myself, yet only to a certain extent. Quite a lot of things happen. For instance, I make gestures, I'm not conscious of them. They happen unconsciously, you can see them. I may say or use words, and I can't remember at all having used those words, or even at the moment I'm not conscious of them. So any amount of unconscious things occur in my conscious condition. I'm never fully conscious of myself. While I'm trying, for instance, to elaborate an argument, at the same time, there are unconscious processes that continue, perhaps a dream, which I had last night, or a part of myself thinks of God knows what, or of a trip I'm going to take, or of such and such people I have seen, or when I am, say, writing a paper, I am continuing writing that paper in my mind without knowing it. You can discover these things, say in dreams, or if you are clever in immediate observation of an individual. Then you see in the gestures or in the expression in the face that there is what one calls arrière-pensée, something behind conscious. So that you have finally the feeling, well, that man has something up his sleeve, and you can even ask him now, what are you really thinking of? You are thinking all the time something else, yet he's not conscious of it. Or he may be. There are of course great individual differences. There are individuals who have amazing knowledge of themselves, of the things that go on in themselves. But even those people wouldn't be capable of knowing what is going on in their unconscious. For instance, they are not conscious of the fact that while they live a conscious life, all the time a myth is played in the unconscious, a myth that extends over centuries, namely, archetypal ideas, stream of archetypal ideas that goes on through one individual through the centuries, and that comes into the daylight in the great movements, say in political movements or in spiritual movements. For instance, in the time before Reformation, nobody can say where man ends. That is the beauty of it, you know. It's very interesting. The unconscious of man can reach God knows where. They are going to make discoveries. Now, another set of ideas which of course are very, very well known to the world, that of course you have originated, center around the terms introversion and extroversion. I know that you are aware of the fact that these terms have now become so widely known. The man on the street is using these terms constantly, describing his wife or his friends, and so on and so forth. It has become probably the most used psychological concepts by the layman that we have, like the word complex. I have invented it too, yes, from the association experiment. Yes, that's right. Well, you see, this is simply practical, because there are certain people who definitely are more influenced by their surroundings than by their own intentions, while other people are more influenced by the subjective factor. Now the subjective factor, and this is very characteristic, was understood by Freud as a sort of pathological autoeroticism. Now this is a mistake. The psyche has two important conditions. One is the environmental influence, and the other is the given fact of the psyche as it is born. The psyche is by no means a tabula rasa. We are a definite mixture and combination of genes, and they are there from the very first moment of our life, and they give a definite character even to the little child. And that is the subjective factor looked at from the outside. Now, if you look at it from the inside, then it is just so as if you would observe the world. When you observe the world, you see people, you see houses, you see the sky, you see tangible objects. But when you observe yourself within, you see moving images, a world of images, generally known as fantasies. Yet these fantasies are facts.
You see, it is a fact that a man has such and such a fantasy. And it is such a tangible fact, for instance, that when a man has a certain fantasy, another man may lose his life. Or a bridge is built. These houses were all fantasies. Everything you do here, all of the houses, everything was fantasy to begin with. And the fantasy has a proper reality. That is not to be forgotten. Fantasy is not nothing. It is, of course, not a tangible object, but it is a fact nevertheless. It is, see, a form of energy, despite the fact we can't measure it. It is a manifestation of something, and that is a reality that is just a reality, as, for instance, the peace treaty of Versailles, or something like that. It is nowhere, you can't show it, but it has been a fact. And so, the psychical events are facts, are realities, and when you observe the stream of images within you, observe an aspect of the world within, because the psyche, you know, if you understand it as a phenomenon that takes place in so-called living bodies, then it is a quality of matter. As our body consists of matter, we discover that this matter has another aspect, namely a psychic aspect. So it is simply the world from within, seen from within. It is just as if we were seeing into another aspect of matter. This is an idea that is not my invention. Old Democritus already talked of the spiritus insertus atomus, the spirit inserted in atoms. Namely, the spirit that is inserted in atoms. That means psyche is a quality that appears in matter. It doesn't matter whether we understand it or not, but this is the conclusion we come to if we draw conclusions without prejudices. And so, you see, the man who is going by the external world, by the influences of the external world, say, society or perceptions, sense perceptions, thinks that he is more valid, you know, because this is valid, this is real, and the man who goes by the subjective factor is not valid because subjective factor is nothing. No, that man is just as well based, because he bases himself upon the world from within, and so he is quite right even if he says, "Oh, it is nothing but my fantasy," you know. And of course that is the introvert, and as the introvert is always afraid of the external world, he will tell you when you ask him, he will be apologetic about it. He will say, of course, yes, I know it's only my fantasies, and he has always a resentment. And as the world in general, particularly a maker, is extroverted like hell, the introvert has no place, because he doesn't know that he beholds the world from within, and that gives him dignity, and that gives him certainty, because it is nowadays particularly that the world hangs on a thin thread, and that is the psyche of man. Assume that certain fellows in Moscow lose their nerve or their common sense for a bit, and the world is in fire and flames. Nowadays we are not threatened by elementary catastrophes. There is no such thing as an H-bomb. That is all man's doing. We are the great danger. Psyche is the great danger. What if something goes wrong with the psyche? It is demonstrated to us in our days what the power of the psyche is of man. How important it is to know something about it, but we know nothing about it. Nobody would give credit to the idea that the psychical processes of the ordinary man, have any importance whatever. One thinks, oh, he is just what he has in his head. He is all from his surroundings. He is taught such and such a thing, and particularly if he is well housed and well fed, then he has no ideas at all. And that's the great mistake, because he is just that as which he is born, and he is not born as a tabula rasa, but as a reality. Now, of course, one of the very common, I think, misconceptions of your work among some of the writers of America had been that they had sort of characterized your discussions of introversion and extroversion as suggesting that the world is made up of only two kinds of people, introverts on one end and extroverts on the other. Would you like to comment about that? Bismarck once said, "God may protect me against my friends, with my enemies I can deal myself alone." You know how people are, They catch a word and then everything is schematized along that word. There is no such thing as a pure extrovert or a pure introvert. Such a man would be in the lunatic asylum. Those are only terms to designate a certain penchant, a certain tendency. For instance, the tendency to be more influenced by environmental influences or more influenced by the subjective factor. That's all. And you see, there are people who are fairly well balanced and are just as much influenced from within as from without, or just as little. And so with all the finer classifications, you know, they are only sort of points de repere, points for orientation. My whole scheme of typology is merely a sort of orientation, namely, there is such a factor as introversion, there is such a factor as extroversion. The classification of individuals means nothing at all. It is only the instrumentarium for the practical psychologist to explain, for instance, the husband to a wife or vice versa. For instance, it is very often the case, one could almost say, it is almost a rule, but I don't want to make too many rules. In order not to be schematic, that an introvert marries an extrovert for compensation, or another type marries the countertype to complement himself, for instance. Dr. Jung, of course, tied in with your typology and quotation marks for introversion and extroversion. We first know of your concepts of thinking, feeling, sensation, and intuition. And of course, it would be very interesting to hear some expansion of the meaning of these particular terms as related to the introvert-extrovert dichotomy. Well, there is quite a simple explanation of these terms, and it shows at the same time how I arrived at such a typology. Namely, sensation tells you that there is something, thinking, roughly speaking, tells you what it is, feeling tells you whether it is agreeable or not to be accepted or not accepted or rejected, and intuition, now there is a difficulty. Intuition, now there is a difficulty. You don't know ordinarily how intuition works, so when a man has a hunch, you can't tell exactly how he got at that hunch or where that hunch comes from. It is something funny about intuition. I will tell you a little story. I had two patients. The man was a sensation type. I had two patients. The man was a sensation type, and the woman was an intuitive type, of course. They felt attraction. And so they took a little boat and went out to the lake of Zurich. And there were those birds that dive after fish, you know. And then after a certain time, they come up again, and you can't tell where they come up. And so they began to bet who would be the first to see the bird. Now, you would think that the one who observes reality very carefully, the sensation type, would of course win out. Not at all. The woman won the bet completely. She was beating him on all points, because by intuition she knew it before. Now, how is that possible? Well, sometimes, you know, you can really find out how it works by finding the intermediate links. You see, it is a perception by intermediate links, and you only get the result of that whole chain of associations. Sometimes you succeed in finding out, but more often you don't. So my definition is intuition is a perception by ways or means of the unconscious. That is as near as I can get. That is a very important function, because when you live under primitive conditions, a lot of unpredictable things are likely to happen. And there you need your intuition, because you cannot possibly tell by your perceptions, by your sense perceptions, what is going to happen. For instance, you are traveling in a primeval forest. You only see for a few steps ahead. You go by the compass, perhaps, and you don't know what there is ahead. It is uncharted country. If you use your intuition, then you have hunches, and when you live under such primitive conditions, you instantly are aware of hunches. For instance, there are places that are favorable, there are places that are not favorable. You can't tell for your life what it is, but you better follow these hunches, because anything can help. Quite unforeseen things. For instance, at the end of a long day, you approach a river, you don't know that there is a river. Yet, when you come to the river, that is quite unexpected. For miles there is no human habitation. You cannot swim across, it's all full of crocodiles. So what, now, such an obstacle hasn't been foreseen. But it may be that you have had an hunch, that you remained in the last likely spot, and that you wait for the following day, that you can build a raft or something of the sort, or look out for possibilities. For instance, you also can have intuitions and it constantly happens in our jungle called a city. You can have a hunch something is going wrong, particularly when you are driving an automobile. For instance, it is a day where nurses appear at the street, and they always try to get something interesting, like a suicide, to be ran over. That's more marvelous, apparently. And then you get a peculiar feeling, and really, at the next corner, already is a second nurse that runs in front of the automobile. Duplicity of cases, that is a rule, that such a chance happens in coming groups. And so you see, we have constantly warnings, hints, that consist perhaps in a slight feeling of uneasiness or uncertainty, fear. Now, under primitive circumstances, you will pay attention to these things. They mean something with us in our man-made, absolutely, apparently safe conditions. We don't need that function so very much, yet we still use it. So you find the intuitive types, for instance, among bankers, Wall Street men. They follow hunches,